Hey everyone, I'm Jess Cagle, the editor of People, and we are live today talking about Princess Diana as the 20th anniversary of her death approaches. And I am here with a group of People editors who probably know more about Diana than just about anybody on the planet. We've done a new cover story, we have a new documentary out, and we have a lot of new details about her life that are completely fascinating. Diana captivated the world from the first moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, and she left us all stunned, of course, when a tragic car accident abruptly ended her life in 1997. Over the years, the global fascination with the princess has landed her on the cover of People more than any other individual in the magazine's history. This week's issue marks her 58th cover. The story is called The Real Diana, and we tell the story through exclusive personal accounts from family and friends who knew her best, people who have hardly ever spoken about her before. As we commemorate her life and her legacy, People magazine has also partnered with ABC for a two-night television event called The Story of Diana. Here's a sneak peek of the documentary.
After my mother left, it was really the two of us growing up together alone.
She was the lonely child who became the most famous woman in the world.
Diana had no idea what she was stepping into.
Millions adored her, but true love eluded her.
She wanted somebody to just love her.
ABC and People magazine bring you untold stories from those closest to her.
When she was in private, she was in pieces.
The revelations were shocking.
The Story of Diana, the two-night television event, starts Wednesday, August 9th on ABC.
Every moment of that documentary is just fascinating. Here with me to talk about the life of Diana with new details about her life, the woman behind the headlines, are People's deputy editor, Dan Wakeford, our creative director, Andrea Dunham, our executive editor, Cindy Sands, and also our editor-at-large, Kim Hubbard. So excited to talk to you about this stuff today because it's so fascinating. We're also going to hear from other People staffers who've covered Princess Diana over the years, including our Royals editor, Michelle Tauber, and our chief foreign correspondent, Simon Perry, who did such incredible work on this week's cover story and on the ABC documentary, as well as our style and beauty director, Andrea Leventhal, who knows everything about style and beauty, and also Princess Diana. So to everyone watching, you can also be part of this conversation. Send us a video of your questions and comments about Diana to burst.com/Diana. You can also join the conversation on Facebook Live and on Twitter by using the hashtag #TheRealDiana. So Dan, to start us off, so you were a very big advocate early this year that we needed to do a big 20th anniversary cover for Diana, the 58th Diana cover in the magazine's history. Why did you so want to tell this story, and why do you think the public fascination has endured this long?
I think her story just has lasted the time. I mean, she's this beautiful blonde protagonist who nearly took down the British monarchy, which in history terms is crazy. Then also I think she's just so relatable to our readers. Readers love her. She's so likable, and she's also gone through so many struggles that they can relate to. She's struggled with her body image. She's gone through divorce. She's been cheated on. She's even had the ultimate primal fear of leaving your kids behind you. And so it's incredibly relatable.
Andrea, why do you think that people still talk about Diana? I mean, it's 20 years after her death, and there's still this fascination.
She was the most vulnerable of celebrities. I think she was the most real of all celebrities. She wore every emotion on her sleeve, and I think people related to that.
She would have been a great actress, because if you look at photos, you can see every single thing that she's thinking playing across her face. She would be the worst at playing poker.
Right.
I mean,
she was a silent film actress.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those moments when she's with Prince Charles and you can tell they're not happy, you can tell they're not happy, only because of her eyes. One of the most watched moments in modern history, the wedding of Charles and Princess Diana on July 29th, 1981. Everybody remembers where they were when the wedding of the century took place. Kim, what do you remember about it?
I remember getting up at 4:30 in the morning when the coverage started and watching it with my roommate. We were so excited. It was so romantic, and we thought Charles was just the cutest.
Tell us more about this roommate.
She was just a regular roommate.
Okay, all right, okay. Cindy?
I was in Texas, so it was an hour earlier. And we just all wanted to be Diana. It was the fairy tale. She had found her prince. We thought she was going to live happily ever after.
I was in Texas too, and I wanted to be Diana.
Did you have her hair as well?
Yes,
Probably better than mine.
I'm going to go to Simon Perry, our Royals correspondent, to talk on Burst to talk about what it was like living in London and covering the wedding from there.
So I was a teenager when Princess Diana got married, and I remember, the country ground to a halt, and if you were living in London or could get there, people went to view it, of course, on the streets or get as close as they could to the action. But most of us watched it on the television, and as I say, I was a teenager, so I would flit in and out of the room where we were watching and do other things and just catch an eye or a look at it every so often. But what I do remember is my mum sitting watching the ceremony and the carriage ride and getting her camera out and taking photos of the television screen. This is the pre-digital age, remember, and she's taking photographs of the screen just in order to have a remembrance of the day. So we've still got the still images from her grainy pictures in the photo album at home of Diana in the carriage, taken off the TV screen by her camera.
That explains so much about Simon Perry, who I love. Dan, you were also living in England. What was it like?
I was slightly younger than Simon. I was 6 years old, but I have a hazy memory. It's like one of the highlights of your childhood. It was like the whole nation came together, and there was garden parties, there was street parties, there was a village fete. Everyone was waving flags. It was really, really exciting.
It was also a dark time in England. You may not have known it as a 6-year-old, but it was this. The economy was terrible. Yeah. The royal family was just considered by most people in England as this artifact that they really resented having to support.
I mean, people were really anti-monarchist at the time. The country was in a really bad state. My mum always reminds me the bins weren't being collected. There was garbage everywhere. You'd have electricity strikes, and then you had these people who just had inherited wealth, inherited power, and were extremely privileged. And there was a lot of resentment, and people started to question: do we need this monarchy?
And then suddenly this engagement and what people considered to be a great love story in this fairy tale wedding happened, and everybody just suddenly was like, we love the royals. But however, not a great day, as we now know, for Diana herself. It's worth noting that Camilla Parker Bowles, who's of course now married to Prince Charles, and was his ex-girlfriend at the time of the wedding, was actually present at Charles and Diana's wedding. Now, how do you think that affected Diana? Kim?
It must have made her more nervous, and also she almost called the wedding off beforehand because she knew that Camilla was kind of still in the picture, and her sister said, it's too late, you can't. So it was more complicated than we had any idea.
Dan?
I just think it's amazing that she still let her be in there, that she couldn't organise for Camilla not to witness that wedding if she knew that. But
well, there were such rules and regulations to the British aristocracy that she talked about walking down the aisle and she was looking for Camilla's face in the crowd.
And there's photographs where you can see her looking right at her.
Yeah, there was 3 in the marriage even then.
Yeah.
She was suspicious, but she didn't know, though.
No, she didn't know.
Charles denied it. So she just had her instincts to work on.
That's that strength that she's always had.
We can't talk about the wedding without talking about Diana's dress, a happier subject. Style and beauty director Andrea Leventhal sent us this video.
Diana's wedding dress, which was designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel, is the most famous wedding dress of all time, and with good reason. The gown took 3 months to make and had a 25-foot train that was hand embroidered with pearls and sequins. The British press went crazy trying to get information about the dress. They even resorted to rooting through the designer's trash to find sketches of it. But it remains a secret until the big day when Diana walked down the aisle with 700 million people around the world tuning in to get a glimpse of her in her gown. And it immediately created a huge trend for brides who started to wear puffy sleeves and huge skirts. And even though that was back in the 80s, the dress still remains a huge inspiration to brides who want to look like a real-life princess on their own wedding day.
I'm not sure the puffy sleeves were that good an idea. Like, this is a big dress. The other thing that they didn't count on, and you'll have to look back at photos of it, but it really wrinkled. They didn't count on her sitting in that like
Kind of looked like
stagecoach,
bunched up
whatever
toilet
she-
paper at one time. It was sort
Right,
of not.
but it's still, it is still probably the most famous wedding dress in history.
Yeah.
We see Diana as a glamorous princess at her wedding, but there was this perception of her as a commoner. And this was one of the things that we bought into this love story so readily. Like, oh, she's a commoner and Prince Charles has swept her off her feet and taken her to the palace. But who was she really? I'll start with Dan.
Well, she was aristocracy, and she was actually born on the Queen's estate. So they had a house on the Queen's estate. They were very close to the royals. So the idea of being a commoner is just basically everybody putting their projection of her as in, like, I can be a princess too because I'm common and I could get my prince just like she has done.
That was exactly it.
Yeah.
Even in America, we knew she was an aristocrat, but we thought she was us. You know? And
right.
she was marrying her prince.
She was not us.
Yeah.
She called the Queen Aunt Lilybet when she was growing up.
Yeah.
That should have been a clip.
Yeah, it was funny. There's a great interview that Michelle and Simon and the producers of the ABC documentary did with Charles Spencer, her brother, who, when his sister started dating Prince Charles, he couldn't understand why photographers were chasing her around. He was like, what's the big deal? She's marrying Chuck from down the street. The Spencers were so rich that they probably thought the royal family were like,
You're right.
like, I don't know.
We could do better.
Exactly. It turns out she could have. Our senior royals editor, Michelle Tauber, sent in this video about Diana's childhood home, Althorp, which gives us a lot of insight into who Diana Spencer was before she became a royal. Watch.
So the Spencers are not your everyday family, and that was very evident during our interview with Charles, 9th Earl Spencer, at their family home, which is a truly remarkable place. For starters, it has a 500-year history. It sits on more than 500 acres, and it has 90 rooms. And one of my favorite moments during our interview with Charles Spencer was when he recalled their childhood time, Charles and Diana, growing up at Althorp. And when you walk into the family home, there's this giant black and white checkered floor, and it makes a really cool sound as you step onto it. And he said Diana, who as a young girl had been an aspiring dancer, would put on her tap shoes and spend hours dancing on that floor. And as he told the story, you could really imagine it. Also, throughout Althorp, there are personal photos of Diana, of Charles and Diana and their sisters, of their parents, gorgeous paintings. I would describe Althorp as sort of one part family home, one part Downton Abbey, one part museum, and one part Diana lover's paradise.
What, is she calling from a phone booth?
I was trying to figure that out.
I was like, Michelle, are you in Doctor Who? That's fascinating. We know so much about Diana, and working on the cover story and working on the documentary has given us all a lot more insight into her life. What is something about her childhood, about her life, Kim, that you find particularly telling?
I think, well, that learning how upset she was when her mother left, she just was devastated and I think never really recovered from it. They called her mother a bolter, and Diana was just so lonely and never got the attention and love she wanted, which played out in the rest of her life tragically.
Yeah, this amazing interview with Charles, where Charles Spencer, who said Diana would literally sit on the back steps of that giant house on that estate and like wait for her mom to come back. Very sad.
It breaks your heart.
Yeah.
He talks about crying in bed in the middle of the night after their mother left, and she was just afraid to go down to him too, because she was afraid of the dark and didn't want to go, but clearly both of them were heartbroken.
Yeah, Dan?
I also think it's interesting in our cover story, the revelation that Charles gave that she wasn't very successful at school, that although she had this amazing emotional intelligence, she didn't have an academic intelligence, which I think is why she was so relatable to our readers, is that she was just caring and clever in other ways.
That is one of the things, right, Andrew?
Yeah.
People gravitate toward. They see her as an underdog despite everything.
And her natural, beautiful affinity for children. Those early pictures of her with the see-through skirt and the two little children on her hips. I mean, it's just, she was a mother from the beginning.
Michelle Tauber sent us another story that she learned while interviewing Diana's brother, Charles. Take a look at this.
So Charles Spencer told us so many amazing stories about his sister, But one that struck me the most was a time that he and Diana were young children and they went to visit their mother in Scotland. And they did what was called lobster potting, where they would throw a pot over into the sea in hopes of catching lobsters. And on one occasion, when they pulled the pot up into the boat, what did they catch but this huge conger eel? And in person, Charles Spencer told this story so evocatively, and he said this thing was just writhing, long, sharp teeth, and he said it was really a creature from the deep. And what did Diana do? She pulled out a penknife, and as he said, she took care of it. And he said, you know, that was a strong girl. That was a brave girl. And hearing him tell it, you really got that sense.
Again, from the phone booth. Fascinating. When you hear that anecdote, when you hear that story, it's so telling to me because it really foreshadows the incredibly formidable woman that she became after she broke up with Charles.
She would take on anybody, as Kim said, that she'd even took on the royal family, which would seem like somebody you'd never be able to take on.
What were you surprised whenever, like, the Andrew Morton book came out and all of that, and suddenly she just emerged as this figure of confidence, juxtaposed with like the bride in a skirt that we saw early on?
I think the Morton book actually reveals so many of her vulnerabilities that we didn't know at the time. And how upset she was by Charles's ongoing friendship with Camilla, and how she doubted herself in those early years. It was really surprising because we thought she had the perfect life, and it clearly wasn't perfect at all.
The vulnerability went deeper than we thought it did, because the book told about her bulimia and her trying to commit suicide.
All during the early years of her marriage. During those early years is, of course, when she also became a mother. Shortly after the wedding, she became pregnant, and she gave birth to Prince William, welcoming the future King of England into the world on June 21st, 1982. Then the birth of Prince Harry followed 2 years later in September of 1984. Dan, how did her public image change when she became a mom?
She became even more popular, like to be the Britain's leading mum and to be somebody who was already caring but was now caring for the heirs of the throne and actually shaping the next future King of England.
And she was a very hands-on mom. Why do you think, why was she so hell-bent on being not like Prince Charles' mother was with him? Or really, not to be unfair to Queen Elizabeth, but why was she so hell-bent on on giving her kids some kind of normalcy?
She didn't have it herself. I think she, quite frankly, wanted to give them everything she hadn't had in her own life. She wanted warmth. She had lived in a cold castle her whole life, and she was able to exude warmth and really provide that for these children, and it was beautiful. It broke the mold.
Cindy, do you think it was more a reflection of, like, the way she was as a mom, very down to earth, very hands-on? Do you think it was really a reaction against her own upbringing and not just a rebelling against royal child rearing?
I think it was both. I mean, certainly she wanted to be a great mom to them. She took them to McDonald's. She took them to the amusement park.
They went on water rides.
Yeah,
I like that.
And it was fun. Like, she was a fun mom. And I think she saw the way the palace was so cold and stuffy, and she thought children can't grow up like that.
She saw how it affected Charles and how he was emotionally stunted. So she'd seen it in her own husband, and she didn't want that for her son.
I also think she was sort of still a child and wanted to have fun, and she sort of brought her own sense of fun to her.
She was very, very young.
Yeah, she was 20.
That's true.
Yeah, she was 20 years old.
When she had William.
And then I think going out of the palace grounds with the children was the only time that she was free. If you can imagine, you were this very young woman who up until this time have been like running around with your friends your own age, and it was a fun group of men and women that she hung out with and young, and suddenly she was living in these stuffy rooms. Right, with presumably some fairly stuffy people, and having those kids to get out with was a huge deal for her. It's when she kind of came alive. Princess Diana also showed an incredible amount of care and compassion toward people in need, the sick and the underprivileged. There was, from early on, she was showing us that she had a sixth sense for people who needed compassion, and she was going to be a champion of the underdog. And that was happening right in the very beginning.
Yeah, even from the start, she would go out and reach people. And someone would say that she walked in a room and she knew exactly who needed her that day.
Charles even said that she knew that as a child. She had an instinct for caring for anybody who needed help.
She didn't follow all the rules. You know, it was back when AIDS was a really, really scary thing. And she would hold hands with AIDS patients in the hospital. She would cuddle babies with leprosy. She didn't let things that scared other people away stop her from showing compassion.
Her interaction with AIDS patients in a hospital was a huge turning point in public perception of AIDS. Like she knew the power that she had, but it was very authentic. Yeah. Like she wasn't going to do like the ribbon cutting and things that royals were supposed to do. She was not going to play it safe. She was going to go where she was needed. It happened very, very early on. In fact, there was one of the first things that Charles and Diana did as a couple after they got married was this kind of walkabout in Wales. I talked to Michelle Talbot a lot about this, and it was two things happened. One, she showed that she had a real instinct for interacting with the crowd, especially with children, because she was so good with children, and they just loved her. And it was a very, it was not the kind of standoffish royal walkabout that royals had always done. So two things happened. We saw the power that she had with the crowd, the instincts that she had for a crowd, the authenticity that she had with the crowd, but also everybody ignored Prince Charles.
Yes. Yeah, we saw Charles's reaction to that.
And that wasn't good. And she got no feedback from the royal family. You know, she never went home, you know, at the end of the day after like charming all of Wales to hear, "Great job, Diana."
It was very early on that Charles said, "I'm going to have to get used to seeing the backs of photographers every time I'm with my wife."
Yeah.
That was before they were married.
Yeah.
So he was grumbling.
He was not happy
from the start.
He was making a joke about that. Yeah, not so much a joke. She may have been especially relatable to the public for a royal, but she still gave everyone, as we know, the glamour and elegance that you expect from a princess. Take a look at this video from our style and beauty director, Andrea Leventhal. She sent in talking about Diana's evolution as a fashion icon.
It was inevitable that Princess Diana would become a style icon just based on the fact that she was a real-life princess. But she also became a style icon for another reason, and that was for her relatability. Diana wasn't always the glamorous fashionista that we remember her as. In fact, she started out as a young woman struggling to dress under royal protocol, but she eventually learns how to embrace fashion and even have fun with it. And that's when she started wearing those gorgeous, glamorous, dazzling gowns that we remember her for. Probably one of her most memorable looks is an LBD that she wore back in 1994. She looked so sexy and so confident. In fact, it was dubbed the revenge dress because she wore it on the same night that Prince Charles admitted his adultering ways on a British TV show. So scandalous.
That was a great moment. The public looked up to Diana for her style, but just as we heard Andrea say, they also dissected every aspect of her life, especially the rumors surrounding problems in the marriage. Now, Cindy, you came to People around the time that the marriage started to crumble. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being on the front lines of that story?
It was going bad quickly. I mean, when we look back, the day they announced their engagement, a photographer asked Charles if he was in love, and he said, "Whatever love is." And that should have been the clue. Like, clearly, he was never really into that marriage. He knew what he had to do. He had to produce an heir. That was it. So they were living separate lives, and she was constantly suspicious of Camilla and their very, very close friendship. And they just grew apart. With each day, there was more and more news about how there was something going on there.
And as a journalist, it was pretty great and juicy because nobody was keeping palace secrets after a while.
No, people in the palace were whispering about Diana, and Diana's friends were whispering about Charles. It was a story every other day.
There's also a great anecdote in the documentary about, it's from Colthurst, who was a very close friend of hers. And he said that basically the phones in the palace were being tapped by the palace, and he would start talking to her on the phone, and they had a garbler, so the phone couldn't be tapped in Kensington Palace, and then the line would go dead. because the palace would cut it off if they couldn't understand what people were saying. Like it was such intrigue that it was unbelievable. We talked earlier about Andrew Morton's biography that came out in 1992 and how big a deal that was and how it changed the perception of Princess Diana, who was the most famous person in the world. What was so shocking about that book?
I mean, you've got somebody who's married to Prince Charles, still married, and she's sneaking secrets out of the palace. It's just amazing. If you think about in regular life, if you're kissing and telling on your husband whilst you're still married, it's just crazy.
And she wasn't quoted in the book, but she gave all of the interviews for it. So
and everybody knew
but
that
she
it
didn't
was her.
admit that
right,
at
everybody
first.
knew.
At first, the palace denied that she would never have cooperated like that because it was unheard of.
It's just this whole grey area that what is happening here that exploded and made it even more intriguing that nobody knew.
So this juicy, juicy book comes out. She has told everything. She's told about the Camilla affair. She's talked about her bulimia. I believe she talked about throwing herself down the stairs. It was, I mean, every secret that could have only come from her, really. But the palace denied that she had had anything to do with it. But the day the book came out, I believe, there was one friend of hers who was quoted throughout the book. And Diana made a point of going to her friend's house and hugging her in the street, as if to say, I'm okay with this.
It was a signal. It was a signal to everybody that she endorsed this book.
Yeah. There were a number of covers, Dan, that touched on the issues in their marriage. How long was it that they were able to keep this troubled marriage a secret?
I mean, it was a long time that everyone was speculating. It was years that people were speculating. And then it was 4 years, which is incredible, between the separation and the actual divorce. So they spent 4 years thinking that they were just going to continue in this limbo.
And people started speculating in 1985. I remember I was reading some old clips. That was when they first said, it doesn't look so good in that marriage. That was
They were never
early.
together.
Every photo call they were together.
Because even then, like Harry was only 1 year old, 1 year old, and people were already leaking stuff from the palace. It was so clear. And also, he was, at times, I don't know exactly if he was with Camilla at that point. It's not clear exactly when they resumed and when they stopped their relationship because it was on and off. However, when he was on with Camilla, they were pretty public about it because it's a very sort of aristocratic thing. It was like an arranged marriage and they both had their own things going on.
In the documentary, there's a photographer who said she was hired whilst the marriage was still alive to go to an event and photograph him dancing with Camilla. And she was just like, what am I watching here? I can't tell anybody about this.
Yeah. That was sort of the thing in the aristocracy and royalty that she ultimately sort of rebelled against. A sort of arranged marriage was what a lot of them did. And it was very acceptable for then the husband and wife, or the wife after she had produced the heir and the spare, to then go off and have their own relationships. So to Prince Charles, that seemed like a very normal, acceptable thing, but this was not the life that Diana wanted.
Diana was a very romantic woman. She read Barbara Cartland novels growing up. She had a fantasy.
She was related to Barbara Cartland.
She was.
She bought the fantasy.
And so this was not going to stand for her. She wanted more than this.
Well, she was not going to be locked up in the palace while he went and had his affair.
She would have been allowed to have affairs. That's what's
and she did.
Strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Was everybody in the UK, like, I find it fascinating that in the UK there was, because here it was all Team Diana.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, here it was, she's the one that our heart goes out to. But in the UK there was Team Charles also.
Certainly not. And it was definitely Team Charles. You're either Team Charles or Team Diana. My family were very split. I think...
like Republicans and Democrats?
Who in your family was Team Charles?
My dad's side of the family were very Team Charles. My mum's side of the family would be more Diana. I think there's elements of misogyny at play here. Also, there's elements in England of actually much more respect for the monarchy and honour for the crown. And so they would automatically side with the king-to-be.
Diana and Charles separated in 1992, but they didn't officially divorce until 1996, which must have made for 4 incredibly awkward years in Buckingham Palace. What was this period of time like for her? Kim?
Well, luckily the palace is very big, so they could not run
Yes,
into
she
each
had her own room.
Exactly.
So yeah, they were pretty living separate lives, and she was getting more and more confident, I think, in that period too. Even though the divorce hadn't come through, she was doing more charity work. She was sort of coming into her own, I would say, during that time.
Any hope of an amicable separation? I mean, you could see on her, at one point they went on like some kind of tour together to a foreign country, some diplomatic thing. And while they were separated, which is so strange, like just make them do their separate. Anyway, the Queen forced them apparently to go together. And oh my gosh.
It was Korea, I think.
It was Korea, yeah, absolutely.
Basically rolling her eyes.
I mean, she's miserable.
Yeah.
It was the most insane thing.
It was.
Any hope of some kind of amicable separation was dashed when she did this Martin Bashir interview, where she famously said about her marriage that there were 3 of us in the marriage. Did that make it, that's what really made it clear to the public that she knew of Charles and Camilla's affair
It made
all along.
it made it clear to everybody, and that's when the Queen stepped in and said, "We're having none of this, just divorce.
Yeah.
That you are now dragging us through the mud, and the monarchy will not survive if this continues."
And Charles had made it clear before that, too, with his interview, saying that he had been faithful till the marriage irretrievably
Right,
broke
he had
down. Remember
admitted
that?
his own infidelity. It was just broken.
It was
Yeah.
better than a soap opera.
Right, it really was.
Well, the fact that like these are like, especially Prince Charles, who never says anything. And like suddenly he's on television one night and is like, I had an affair.
Well, it's ironic.
It was insane.
He had done the interview to try and rehabilitate his image.
Oh.
Because they were separated and Diana was getting all this positive attention and people thought he was this, old cheating cold fish. And so he's sitting there talking about all he wants to do as a future king, and they ask him the key question, which is, were you unfaithful to Diana? And he admits that he was. That's all anybody remembers
That's
from that
all
interview.
anyone remembers.
But first he said no, remember? He said, yes, I was faithful.
Yes, I was faithful.
Until the marriage became irretrievably broken.
Right.
It was almost like he hadn't decided, that just had to come out. He hadn't
And then he
decided
said
to
it.
do it.
Right. So that means you weren't faithful. Yeah.
That would be yes.
That would be yes, I was unfaithful. After all the scandals surrounding their marriage, then the divorce, things really started to look up for Diana. So Cindy, tell us about this period in her life when things really did seem to be going well.
Well, she was confident now. As you said, she'd come into her own. She had the charities that she cared about. She was drawing worldwide attention to causes that were very important to her. She came to America. She did a trip to Chicago in the summer of 1996.
And you did a cover story,
I did.
Wows Chicago.
I did.
Right?
I was writing the cover story here. And everyone was just everyone who met her was stunned by how beautiful she was and how charming she was.
One of our colleagues, Liz, met her, didn't she, that night?
She
and
did.
She said she was so funny. And there's this anecdote where she said to Liz, "Why are they playing Tony Bennett here? Everywhere I go, they play bloody Tony Bennett. It's because somebody made up a quote that I like her and I can't stand him."
Poor Tony.
I know, poor Tony. But by the way, if Tony Bennett is watching, first of all, Facebook Live us, hashtag The Real Diana. And you're great. So what was it? And then she started dating again. And what was that like for the world to see her dating again? And what was it like for Diana to try to be dating again?
Well, a lot of the dating we didn't really know about. She was dating Hasnat Khan, the surgeon, and that was completely secret. What we really knew about was when she started dating Dodi Fayed.
Tell us a little bit more about Hasnat Khan, because that was a real relationship. Went on for about 2 years. Do we have any insight into why that relationship was different for her and why it ultimately didn't work out?
Well, he didn't like the publicity. He couldn't deal with it, and that was a deal breaker for him. It wasn't the life that he planned for himself.
He was this sort of unassuming doctor.
But brilliant. And I think that she was very attracted to that.
And also kind, and he was doing such good work.
Real.
And she was
liked
doing
his
good
heroism.
work.
There was something heroic.
He was a
about him.
heart surgeon, and she wanted to be, she was all about people's hearts. And
Again, it feels like a romantic novel that she was projecting.
Do you think that the difficulties in that relationship, because he did not, she had told, I mean, one friend who's interviewed in the documentary says that, Diana had come to her and was like, who would want me? Here I am with all of this baggage. And she was literally terrorized by the British paparazzi every step
Whoever
of her
took
life.
her on would have to provide that security that she'd need. because
Exactly.
The royal family had taken that away from her.
Oh,
and
that's right, they did.
and there was, and she had 2, kids. I mean, she was, a single mom with 2 kids, which, whether you're Princess Diana or not, that's complicated. Plus, all of this other stuff that goes with it. And so Dr. Khan had issues with that. Do you think there was something about Diana that thrived and fed on the publicity and the spotlight?
Oh, definitely. I think that it was a two-way street with her, and I think that her sons realise that now, that you can't let the
Very
press in
transactional.
and the public in that far, that you have to keep something back for yourself. And she fed into this, and she played with the publicity and enjoyed it from the very beginning.
But I think she had been willing to give it all up if he would have done that. But she couldn't escape it. I mean, it wasn't
Right, I
like
was
she
just
could
gonna
say,
say.
I don't want to be famous anymore. People would not stop hounding her.
That's true. And
So
and
she had
even
no
if she
choice.
hadn't
Feed the beast, yeah.
Yeah, even if she hadn't come out and sort of commoditized her private life in a way by, releasing it in the Morton book and the Bashir interview, it all probably would have been there anyway. She tried to control it and couldn't, and maybe made it a little bit worse. But it was never going to go away.
No.
Although they discussed moving to Pakistan. She supposedly was willing to do that, and he didn't want to. He thought that would never work out and they would still be hounded.
Cut to you in Pakistan with your reporter's notebook, like here and over.
If only.
That would have been, okay, so you mentioned a second ago, like whoever she dated was gonna have to, a huge concern for her, just like Jackie Kennedy, a huge concern for her was going to be security, because she needed serious security and a certain kind of life to shield her from everything that was always coming at her. So she famously started dating Dodi Fayed, who was the son of an Egyptian billionaire. And you wrote, Kim, the story when that broke, A Guy for Die. Did you write that headline?
I believe I did,
Oh,
yes.
okay, because it rhymes. I just want you to know.
She's a
Thank
poet.
you. I don't think I wrote, the headline for the story inside was Howdy Doty, which I
claiming that
hope
one.
I did not write that.
There you go.
Because that was pretty cheesy.
That's a good one.
What did people make of their partnership? And particularly, there were a lot of photos of them together that
Yes, there was
she allowed.
There was that famous kiss, The Kiss. Everyone was like, have you seen The Kiss?
And then, like,
sort
leopard
of grainy
print
picture. Leopard
bathing
print,
suits.
yes, very good.
Yeah.
High-waisted.
And those pictures of them on the yacht, looking
Yeah.
very intimate. So I remember people were sort of excited. Oh, good,
fussy.
she has a man. But then when we heard about Dodi, everyone was kind of like, that doesn't sound so good. He was a playboy. He didn't have a very good reputation for being, upstanding. He was sort of a film producer.
He was a
but, like,
party animal.
He was a party
Yeah.
animal, and he just, lived off his money. So
His father's money.
His father's money,
Yeah.
right. So when we wrote the story, we're all hoping, I really hope this is not her Aristotle Onassis, because maybe that's the direction she's going in, but we wanted more for her than that.
Friends in the documentary said it wasn't serious.
Yes. She said he was going to give her a ring, but she was going to put it on her right hand. Or that was Rosa Monckton, her friend, I think, who said that.
It was, of course, with Dodi Fayed on August 31st, 1997, that she was with him in the tunnel in the car when she died. Many of us have a very specific, very vivid memory of where we were when we heard that terrible news. I remember I was in a cab, and I was going down the West Side Highway in Manhattan, and I heard it on the radio, and it sounded, you thought it was a horror. It was like, I'm not going to compare it to September 11th because that was a worse tragedy, but this was a shocking tragedy. And when you hear something like that, you think it's a joke, or you want to minimize it in your mind. And
Trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, and I thought it's not real. But anyway, then the reports just kept going, over and over that Diana's dead. And then I remember this so well. Suddenly, Tom Cruise was on the air, being interviewed about the paparazzi in Paris, because even in the early hours of her death, there was speculation that they had something to do with it. Andrea, do you remember where you were when you heard?
I was preparing for my wedding. It was days before, and I was utterly gutted. And I remember thinking that it was that was probably where the word paparazzi really did start to resonate in my head. It was just a word that was constantly used all the time. I don't even remember it up until that point being a big point in my life. But the paparazzi killed her, and that was what I associated. that she had been murdered by the paparazzi. That was pretty shocking to me and horrifying. I remember crying real, very deep, sobbing tears with my mother over this. It was a huge loss.
Dan, do you remember?
I woke up, I was in England, I woke up to the news that day, and it just felt like one of the most solemn days that I remember. The whole of England was just dark and cloudy, and everyone was so quiet. And at the time I was working on a news television show, which was a comedy look at the week's news in England. So the show was cancelled that week.
Yeah, that just as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no comedy in England that week.
Cindy, do you remember?
I do. I was at a friend's house, and the TV was on in the other room, and we kind of heard in the other room that there was a crash. And for a few hours, you thought she had survived it.
That's right.
There were reports that she'd been taken to the hospital, and we thought, of course she survived it. You can't lose Diana. Like, she was such a part of our lives, and we stayed up way past midnight until we got the horrible news.
Kim?
I was on vacation in Vermont in a house with no TV or no access to anything, so somebody had to call me, and I was so stunned, and I had left work the week before after closing that Guy for Die story.
Yeah, you had just written.
I had just closed it. And
that was on stands.
It was on stands, and I was
died.
going on vacation. I felt sort of bad about going because it was moving so fast, and I said to my editor, I hope nothing happens with Diana while I'm gone. That wasn't what I had in mind. But I just remember feeling, it seemed so personal. It seemed so as if it was someone you knew.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a look at where viewers said they were when Diana died.
I have a very clear memory of the day Princess Diana died because it happened to be my wedding day. So I was in the hair and makeup chair first thing in the morning, and someone came down and said, "Oh my gosh, can you believe it? Can you believe it?" I'm like, "What?" And then everyone was like, nothing. But obviously it was nothing. It was something really big. And I guess the one thing I guess I can say is that everyone at my wedding remembered my wedding because they remember this huge thing that happened on that day.
I was breastfeeding my newly born baby, and I had the TV on to keep me company. And all of a sudden, across the ticker came the notice that she'd been in a car accident, and not much more was known. And I remember being awake for a few hours, just wondering what was going to happen and having this feeling in the pit of my stomach. And sure enough, within a few hours, across the ticker came the fact that she had passed. And I was still holding my newly born baby and couldn't imagine someone so young and vibrant, pretty much my age, having been killed in a car accident. I was absolutely devastated for her family, for the country.
I just remember being sad because she was just such a positive, kind of energy and force, during her lifetime. So it was definitely a sad moment, and as all the stories unfolded later, it was just an unfortunate accident.
People's chief foreign correspondent Simon Perry was working in London at People when Diana died, and here's what he remembers.
So after a night of working hard on the story and snatching a little bit of sleep, I rose up really early on the Sunday morning. We'd been pulling any stringer we could. I spoke to Paris to get the reporting up and running there. And of course, early Sunday, we had to start thinking about the tributes and getting reporting from Buckingham Palace. I think we had a young reporter go down to talk to the first people who were laying flowers, which happened spontaneously. No one suggested this was something to do, but that laying of flowers outside Buckingham Palace started in the early hours and obviously continued and became enormous. And there were so many other angles to cover. We sent someone to watch the body come home at RAF Northolt when she flew in with her family in the coffin, and that was an incredibly moving moment in the day. But what I'll always remember and what always struck me was I was on autopilot working very hard, and my wife was away on with some friends that weekend, and eventually tracked me down and called me at the office at about 10 a.m. on the Sunday morning and said, "Hi, what are you doing there?" And I said, "Oh, didn't you know? Diana's died. I'm working, and Diana's sadly died." And the line went quiet, and my wife started crying, and that was the first time I think that it hit me how much the outside world was waking up to this in Britain, and also was just completely taken aback and shocked.
In the ABC documentary, there are a lot of first-hand accounts of people who were in England who then flew to Paris when she was dying or had died. And there's an incredibly, one of her protection officers tells a story of being in the hospital room with her, and I'm not sure if she's passed away yet. I think maybe she had, but there was in the room with her, and he looked out and he saw photographers on the roof of a building across the way, and they, tacked up sheets to just shield her body and, give her some, dignity in that time. Her funeral was also a worldwide event, and the entire world was mourning together in unison. Kim, what do you remember about watching the funeral?
It was another, like the wedding, it was another, I don't remember if we had to get up early, but everyone was watching it. And I was watching it with my daughter. Actually, she was 4 and she had just wandered into the room. She wasn't watching the whole thing. Didn't make her watch funerals. And she said, does everyone know that she died? And I said, well, probably most people. And then she looked, it was the procession, and she said, do the horses know?
Oh.
And I remember thinking, it seems like they do. Yeah. It seems like everyone in the universe is so sad. The universal mourning.
Andrea?
Oh, as your viewer pointed out, her funeral was on my actual wedding day. So there was a little bittersweet feeling there, and it was definitely in the periphery of the event. And even though I had a wonderful, beautiful wedding, thank you very much, I still also would periodically check back and look at the television and watch the procession and the sweet boys walking with their arms behind them and just looking. And the little Harry was just so tiny, and between these men, and you just felt this utter grief. It was so moving.
What was it like to be working and covering it at that time?
It was one of those times where you kind of put aside your own emotions to just get the job done. There was so much to do. We were crashing an issue, we were doing a special issue. There was so much to do that it wasn't until we actually stopped back to see the funeral, because we had done the first issue the week before the funeral. And then you watched it, and it was just so sad. The 2 boys walking behind the casket, the flower arrangement with the word mummy on it.
Oh, the little letter.
One of the top-selling covers in People history was the Diana death cover with no words on it. Andrea, tell us, why do you think that particular cover of People, because it's still one of the most famous magazine covers of all time, why do you think that seared itself into people's heads so much?
I love that you chose no words. It was pretty epic for People magazine not to have any words on its cover. You've only done that a couple of times, maybe 3 times, really. And I think that photograph is emblematic of everything we have ever wanted to believe about her. Her absolute vibrancy, the princess right there. And still manages, that Testino shot, still manages to be very real and approachable while she's wearing a tiara and an incredible set of jewelry, but she just looks like you could reach out and touch her. It's an iconic moment and an iconic presentation, the way that people put it on there.
Cindy, one of the saddest parts of Diana's death is, of course, she left behind these 2 boys, Prince William and Prince Harry. How did, based on what we know now and reporting on it at the time, how did they cope? Because they were so young when they lost their mom.
They really were, and they lost their mom in this incredible scenario where there were paparazzi chasing her, and then there was this enormous outpouring of grief. They didn't get to mourn by themselves. The whole country, the whole world was really mourning with them.
They're also in the rigidity of the royal family and English society, being buttoned up, and this is a time where you didn't show your emotions so much, and I think it's taken them a long time to process this.
And lately, we have heard much more from them about. I believe Harry not long ago talked about having been in therapy for a long time. It had a profound impact on them.
Yeah, he talked to People magazine last year, and he said his mum, every day he tries to make his mum happy, and I think that was one of the first times he began to open up about his mum.
Yeah, how did it impact William, do you think?
I think William was a little bit older, and so it probably impacted him a little bit more, in fact. I mean, neither of them have talked about it as much. Only 20 years, it's taken 20 years for them to come to terms with this.
I think it may have also made him a little more protective of his own family, though.
He definitely manages press attention
Yeah.
differently than his mom did.
Yeah.
And there's, fortunately less attention to it as
Yeah.
well. Her passing brought a new era of celebrity culture to light. What do you think are the biggest lessons and legacies that she left behind, Dan?
Well, within press culture, we learned to be a lot more respectful and distanced, and to be more ethical about whether somebody wants to be the subject of a photo or a story.
Right. It caused a lot of soul searching. Ultimately, most likely she was killed because the driver of her car was drunk, right? People forget that.
I was thinking that. I had forgotten it till you just said it.
Yeah, but the reason they were driving fast is because she was being chased by paparazzi, and I don't know that we entirely know how close they were to the car, et cetera, when it crashed. But the driver was drunk. But certainly the media was blamed for her death. We still blame the paparazzi for her death. When you hear the word paparazzi, that's Princess Diana's death is one of the things that you think about.
Well, her own brother in his eulogy seared that in everybody's memory by saying she was Diana the huntress who died being hunted, and that whole sort of narrative is now seared in our memory.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's a conversation that really continues today. There is, people doesn't. We don't buy photos of celebrities' children unless they're sanctioned, unless they're on a red carpet or portraits the parents took themselves. That conversation, to get to that point where not everyone is fair game, and people do deserve, as media outlets, we have a responsibility to not support, bad journalists or bad paparazzi. That really started with Diana. It certainly raised everyone's sensitivity.
She's had a huge impact. I think she's just changed celebrity all over, like giving back. I don't know if we would have had icons like Angelina Jolie and Bono, whether they would have acted in the same way. She was a trailblazer and was an amazing light and an example for what you should be doing with your celebrity.
Right. I have this spotlight and I'm going to use it for this. Senior Royals editor Michelle Tauber sent in her take on what's enduring about Diana. Watch this.
So one of my favorite things about covering the royals for People is that we often get to highlight Princess Diana's incredible legacy. And really the best way to do that is through her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, of course, as well as Prince William's wife, Catherine, Princess Kate, who have truly taken on the mantle of many of Diana's most important causes, the ones she held the most dear. And that includes everything from HIV testing, AIDS awareness, which is one of Prince Harry's key causes, and he works to reduce the stigma of that, to mental health, which is something the three of them have all taken on increasingly so over the past year or two. And they've really gone a long way toward destigmatizing, talking about problems like suicide, especially among men, depression, things that in the past royals had the stiff upper lip. They were famous for that, and William and Harry and Kate have, shown that that's something that they want to change. They want to be real, and they want to encourage others to seek help when they need it. And Harry and William have spoken quite extensively lately about their own pain following the death of their mother. And a lot of that is coming from a place of wanting others to see that it's okay to hurt, it's okay to seek help, and it's okay not to have that stiff upper lip. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to highlight Diana's enduring legacy.
Well, her legacy is clearly carried on by Prince William and Prince Harry, but also in the way Kate Middleton goes about raising her kids and being a princess. Dan, how does Kate Middleton reflect what that family learned from Diana?
I think she has carried on Diana's parenting habits of not adhering to what you have to do for the royals. She's been a bit rebellious of how she does that, and she's broken barriers with bringing them up as well. I mean, they really do like harking back to Diana, and we did with that cover. We really noticed that she was dressing the same as Diana. On Poppy Day, she wore the same similar hat and peered up to the ceiling. It was so evocative of Diana. There's literally matched outfits wearing exactly the same things. I think William likes the fact to reflect back to his mum and to remember his mum and carry on that legacy.
In the ABC special, we hear Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, imagine what could have been for Diana. Watch this.
Well, what's amazing to me is that the passing of time, that now, you know, William and Catherine are sort of nearly the same age as Diana when she died. One of the great tragedies, of course, is that Diana would have been the best grandmother ever. I love the fact that there's still such veneration inside her immediate family for what she was and what she meant, and I think that's fantastic.
How do you think Diana would have approached being a grandma to Charlotte and George?
She would have been the best grandma. She just had such a fun spirit around her. And when you're the grandma, you don't have to deal with the repercussions.
Oh,
So she would have been a great grandma.
I wonder if she I wonder if she would undo any of the rules that were set by her parents. She's sort of naughty.
I think she would have been in a bit of competition with Kate's mum.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
Prince William joked the other day that she would have been a nightmare as a grandmother because he's like Auntie Mame. She would have like run into the house at bath time and stirred everything up and gotten everybody excited and then off.
See ya.
Like in her horse-drawn carriage, going away. Diana certainly is missed. I want to thank you guys so much, Andrea, Kim, Dan, Cindy, for being here, and also to Michelle and Simon and everyone watching who sent in the memories. For more inside the life of Princess Diana, you can check out this week's issue of People magazine, The Real Diana, and there's also this thing, which I'm told to hold up. It's a special book.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Diana, Her Life and Legacy, which actually is it's a really beautiful book. I think that remembering Diana is, you know, you can't say this about a lot of celebrities, but remembering Diana is a great thing because of her beautiful authenticity and the way that she did stand up for the world's most disenfranchised, and she's an inspiring figure. Don't forget, ABC's two-night television event, The Story of Diana, premieres on August 9th and August 10th at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys for joining us.